Every time we build and ship software, we learn something new. Understanding what worked and what didn't helps us build more confidently the next time around. That's why we're launching the Confident Commit newsletter. We want to help you make better, data-driven decisions. Subscribe today to When It's Software. CircleCI.com/newsletter.
Hello, and welcome to the Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software better and faster.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
I'm your host, Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, industry leader for all things CI and CD. And today, I'm joined by Christine Yen, CEO of Honeycomb. Christine, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to get started. Is this the first time we've had a different guest from the same company? That's a rhetorical question, I think. I'm not expecting you to have done the research on that particular fact, but clear sign that I'm very excited about what y'all do at Honeycomb, about the overall space of observability, and I'm excited to get even more perspective about that. So let's jump right into that. One of the things that I see, I think a lot in your messaging, and I've sort of followed the company. We're a customer that's known for a very long time, is this sense of being prepared, not for the last problem that occurred in your system, but for the one that you don't know is coming. And I'd love to get a little bit of your perspective on that. I think it's a unique thing about this transition from sort of metrics and monitoring to observability, that terminology, and kind of a fundamental piece to how I want developers to think about their systems. And I'm curious how you think about that, and then what's fundamentally different about that approach.
Yeah. So that mindset really came from the company that Charity and I met at. Charity is my co-founder, for anyone who's listening and doesn't know. She was very ops, I was very dev, but we were both building this multi-tenant mobile backend as a service. And what that meant was we were in the business of abstracting complexity away from our customers. Where when I say customer, I mean it very loosely. We had lots of free users. We had some huge users, huge apps on the platform. But this was sort of circa 2012. And if you remember that time, right, mobile was huge. Everyone was experimenting. And as a result, this platform that we had where our promise was essentially, don't worry about the complexity of building apps. Just use our SDK and then magic will happen in the cloud, meant that we had all these different apps using us for all these different purposes, hitting our entire range of API endpoints. And any given day, some app would blow up, usually in a good way, sometimes for us in a bad way. And supporting this system meant that we were basically thrust headfirst and stayed there into the chaos of the mobile scene at that time. And we were very quickly disabused of the notion that we could get ahead of the last problem that we had. Just being engineers, building the system, we were like, man, who knows whether tomorrow will be the day that a dating app from Russia hits, their top apps list and hammers our system. Can't predict for that, can't protect against that. All we can do is embrace and accept the chaos and figure out how to be the most prepared in the face of that. When we started talking about starting Honeycomb, this was 2015. And to give you a sense of the growth of this platform in between those years, she and I met in 2012. I actually don't remember the 2012 number, but in something like 2013, I think we had something like 60,000 unique mobile apps on the platform. By 2015, there were 1 million. So this problem of like heterogeneity, chaos, unpredictability, like mobile uncertainty, it just kept growing. And we sort of looked at what we'd built, and we looked at this giant SaaS multi-tenant thing, and we were like, the world is moving in this direction. Everyone is becoming a platform. Everyone is, at the time, everyone was like, let's go API first. And I think I don't know if we've fully gone there, but everyone certainly has APIs. Lots of folks are moving towards polyglot storage. Lots of folks are moving towards, PLG was taking off. And there were all these trends where we were like, this level of unpredictability is going to become the new norm. And everyone is going to be dealing with the problems that we have. Let's get ahead of that and help engineering teams embrace the chaos like we have and figure out how to react effectively rather than trying to believe, rather than clinging to this belief that they can control and predict what's coming down the road for them.
Well, I can say confidently in 2024 that you were right. That you predicted a trend that has proven to be true. It's nice to be in the future and look back and be like, yeah, we saw that coming. So congrats on that. Also, fun fact, I was 3 of those. What was the number in 2013? 60,000?
60,000. Yeah, you had 3 of them?
I was responsible for 3 of those apps. Yeah, we can go into details about that later. But it was totally Parse, right?
Parse. I still have the app IDs of a couple of the the problematic apps burned into my head of
sadly, I was 0 of the problematic apps, not because I'm brilliant, but rather because none of them took off in a way that would cause you problems, or like 10 users per app or whatever weren't really bogging down the system, I don't think. But awesome. Like, I think that's exactly right. Like you looked ahead and saw a trend. And I think that trend moved from, in 2010, 2011, it was Heroku, Rails monoliths. By 2013, 2014, it was everyone was building a mobile app. And now absolutely everyone builds mobile apps, but they're also building these, as you described, like API first, distributed systems, with maybe fewer people qualified to understand complex distributed systems than the number of people that are building them. And certainly having the tooling to help you get there, is a huge change. Another theme that's come up a whole bunch, actually, speaking of 2024 and where we are now and trends, is developer experience, developer productivity. How do we get folks, focused on building the real value that is important to our customers and not sort of pulled down by the toil? We talk about like overly complex systems, and somehow managing the system becomes my thing instead of delivering value to customers. And I feel like observability plays a big role in that, in sort of liberating folks and getting them back to work. But what's your take on the role that observability plays in that?
It's huge, but obviously I'm biased. I laughed a little bit when you asked whether this is the first time you've had 2 people from the same company on your podcast, because I think of Charity as being the sort of ops person who must have come out of the womb like carrying a pager, right? And I was like, our first interactions were very much the like, Christine, why did you break this? And me being like, I don't know, it worked on my machine. Like, it was just that dynamic. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a lot of code that worked also, but you break things as you change them. And so we have, one of the things I love about working with her on this problem space is that we have these like totally different perspectives into problems that the entire engineering team faces. When we first started and she started talking about dev productivity, it was a lot of like, developers should be on call. Like, it's their responsibility. And very like kind of stick-based approach for how observability helps developer productivity and resilient systems. I like to think I have a little bit more of a carrot approach as a developer who really struggled with understanding the impact of changes I've made, right? Like I remember pushing out a change, and literally this Russian dating app blew up. And like the day after I pushed out this change, I got this ping from the ops team being like, Christine, like, what's your app doing? Or what's your new feature doing? It's thrashing the write throughput on our Cassandra cluster. And I was like, can you rephrase that in terms of apps or endpoints or errors or something that exists in my code that I can put in a test case and try to reproduce? And this is earlier in my career. So again, lots of learning. But when I think back, that's like a very real developer point of view on production issues. You're trying to figure out what what is happening in production in language that lets you actually go fix the problem. And there's so many of the tooling for production systems is geared towards the ops persona. But eventually, at Parse, we ended up using this tool that allowed us to start putting these developer nouns, high cardinality data like app ID or like endpoint or like what endpoint sometimes, or what part of the API they're touching, putting that into the OPSI production tools. And when we started having that connective tissue, when we started enabling a given data source, a given tool, a given view into a production systems to be useful to both ops and dev, it made both sides more productive. It made us be able to work better together. It meant that I, as a developer, could not only sort of check my mental model before I wrote code about what is actually happening out there. Is what I expect to be, the default the traffic profile against this new functionality? Is that actually what's happening? That can inform the code I write, and then can can help me validate that the code that I wrote made the change that I expect. And I am so, it continues to be a real point of passion for me in talking to customers about really enabling their developers to be excited and autonomous and not be in this reactive loop where the ops team comes and yells at them when they make mistakes. We have, developers with good observability tooling, developers can have that visibility into what did I actually do? Mm-hmm. And they can, and that data can be delivered on their terms. And that's really exciting to me. And I think does get developers to this world that, the stick world of developers should be on call and take ownership of their code. But it comes at it from a place of empowerment and answers rather than responsibility. Responsibility is fine too, but both in equal measure.
Well, I think it's a great perspective. And I think that one of the things that I hear in there, I don't know if you use the exact words, is by having that full feedback loop in your own terms, right? Shifting from what happens in production is something that operators control and understand, and they have to translate it for me into, I have visibility on my terms and I can get a good understanding. Like, I am a smart software developer capable of understanding systems. I just talk about things in different ways. Puts confidence in my hands. And when I'm confident, I can deliver more effectively, right? I'm not nervous about putting something in production. I know what the tooling is. I know that I will be able to know if something goes wrong, which puts me a little more in the driver's seat, lean forward, pick your metaphor, to be able to then move, right? I think we talk a lot about, toil and where time goes and those sorts of things when we talk about effective delivery. But I think one of the things that maybe we should spend more time on, I think about it a lot, but I don't see a ton of it out there, is confidence, right? Like, when I am nervous to put something in production, it takes longer. I read the PR for the 18th time, even though I'm not going to see anything new, right? Yeah. And what I really want is to know that, yes, as a human being, I'm going to miss something, but I have a system in place to catch that thing and to reduce the impact of my customers, and therefore I can move more quickly. And I think that whole point about putting it in my mental model, the way that I think about the world, is super fascinating, because I hadn't really considered it that way.
Confidence is precisely right. We hear about this all the time. You hear about customers who have some legacy code that some contractor wrote at one point, and now it's owned by the main engineering team. And the engineering team is like, oh God, it's a dark and scary place. And it's critical business logic, because it was, put in place when there was no engineering team and the founders had just contracted it out. But so it's like critical, but no one wants to touch it. And that fear that fear throws wrenches in being able to make changes, to make something more scalable, to add functionality. It's just the sand in the gears. And what I love about that feeling of confidence and the conversations around confidence, and I think we hear themes of curiosity also. Mm-hmm. The feeling of like, once you are confident, you can be curious, you can go validate your mental model, you can start to get even more proactive. And confidence and curiosity are such traits of folks who go into software engineering, right? It's that wonder of like, what could be, what's happening here. And, I love seeing engineering teams move from a state of reactive fear to like confident, iterative movement, because the whole team then starts to feel empowered to understand what they're doing and why and what the impact they're having is.
Yeah, love it. So on the topic of building bridges across mental models and creating confidence, my favorite subject, the SLO,
Oh yeah.
right, is stakeholders from many groups, but certainly engineering and product. In my mind, this is the real kind of underpinning value, right? Is we sit down and say, this is the customer expectation. If we're meeting that customer expectation, continuing to invest there is actually not the best thing we could do. If we're below that customer expectation, we know exactly how to act. But it feels like every conversation of SLO spends about 3 seconds on that part of the problem and turns into like, but are we measuring this latency correctly? And do we have the right sort of thing? It becomes a very technical, nerding out, I don't know, bike shedding kind of problem and missing the point, what I think is the point, I guess. And so I'm curious if there's, I don't know, I mean, one, if you have that experience, because you've spoken to a lot more people about it than I have for sure, maybe why that is and what advice you give to folks to get them back to sort of focusing on that healthier conversation that's customer centric, right? Like ultimately, I'm confident in delivering, not because there's no thrashing of rights on a particular like segment of the database, but because the customer is having a good experience right now, right? And so I'm curious if you have, if you've sort of guided folks back in that direction and what sort of tools you've suggested to them to do that.
Yeah. Tool literally, of course, is going to be Honeycomb. But here's my thing about SLOs. I think they are confusingly named. SLOs come from SLAs, service level agreements, which, since times of yore, it's about the service you're providing your customers. However, we as an engineering industry have decided to make things actually confusing and define separate services. And now when people hear SLOs, they think, I need one service level objective per service that I have. And in a world where we have hundreds or thousands of different services, then of course, immediately it's going to get down it's going to bring the conversation down away from where, what the customer experience is. And so in conversations like this, I always try to reframe it as like, let's talk about your system level objectives. Like, what is the system trying to do? And then if I have to, it's like, what level of service is your system trying to provide? But I think you're absolutely right that the interesting part about SLOs is that question. It has nothing to do with technology. It has nothing to do with the data. It has to do with different parts of the company coming together as people talking with our faces about what good means. And done really well, SLOs should be able to be that interface for your engineering team to other parts of the org. But it has to start with that conversation. And the way that I like to guide folks to have that conversation about SLOs, take the tool, set it aside. Doesn't actually matter right now what tool you're using. Start with a slide. You and me, we live in slides all day, and especially engineering and product, you're going to the interface, for better or for worse, often slides. Start with a slide. Our engineering leader includes a slide in every one of our board decks each quarter about, I think it's 4 or 5 key SLOs at the company level that demonstrate that we're delivering a good service to our customers. Right? These SLOs are around the ingest experience, making sure that when you get data in, it's available to query within seconds. Right? That's the experience a customer has. Breaks down to a lot of different components, but that's what it means to us to deliver good service. Similarly, query performance and a few other key journeys. But if you start with a slide and it starts to gain this gravitas of like, okay, here's this English language description of what we want to be able to report out of engineering, whether to the board or other functions. Then you can go, once that's set, then you can go and talk about, okay, well, what data do we need to get here? What parts of the system does this touch and need to be sort of contributing data to this SLO calculation? But it has to be that starting backwards, or else you end up with a bunch of disparate signals around your system that are basically just glorified alerts, where you're trying to then piece together the customer experience. And it's possible, just really hard, and kind of defeats the purpose of centering what your customers are experiencing.
Yeah, I think it's, well, I used it as the transition in, but the whole like bridging mental models was actually just from what you said earlier. I think it's a great way of looking at it in product and engineering, or thinking about problems in different ways and having something that they can share, not just to have an agreement, but to have a common language, right? And as you're describing, like, this is a common language. It's customer centered, which means boards have different skills than many of the people in the team. So like, they understand it, customers understand it, my support team understands it, right? They can explain to a customer what's going on in those terms. Product and like everybody understands that. It's not specific to a particular domain or some nuance of that domain or whatever, right? And I think it just reframes the conversation, whether it's a board meeting or an incident, around what truly matters, right? And then you can set, again, or align your approach around what matters, right? Like, again, you going all the way into the incident mode, like, our goal is to move this number right here. That's the one that matters. Like, it doesn't actually matter if we change the way the database is performing. Mitigating that problem in a way that allows the customer to get the right experience, that's what matters, right? So how do we kind of refocus around that? And I do think like bridging the language in that way is great, because it allows those other people to participate in that conversation.
Yeah. We use a lot of shared language, because that's what in the best case, that's what technology can do and data can do. It gives everyone a single place to look at. As a vendor with what I think is a pretty cool, SLO functionality in the product, I would love to be able to go to a customer and be like, you don't have to think. We will just auto suggest SLOs for you, and we will just tell you what to put an SLO around. It would sound real great, and probably be an impressive claim. And also, I think it'd be doing teams a disservice, because we as a vendor are never going to know what matters to your business better than you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is one of my most interesting explorations, I think, around automation in general, is sometimes I want people to do the work, right? Not because I want them to always have to like toil or whatever, but sometimes actually taking data and putting it in a different thing or whatever that might be is the time when you think about it. And when too many things happen automatically, then you stop looking. Do you know what I mean? And to your point, I think saying, okay, no, we're going to sit down as a group and figure out what really matters to our customer. We have a great place to put that information once we know what it is, right? To define the measurements around it, all those things. But if we don't think about what matters to our customer like that, who's going to? We can't just allow someone else to make that decision.
I also want to, so I love how much of the conversation is around what matters to the customer rather than detecting an incident. Because I had this cool use case I want to share with you. Last year, we jumped on the AI hype train, and we're building this query assistant thing on top of an LLM to translate natural language into a Honeycomb query. And we were moving really fast and wanted to get something out to market very quickly. But we knew that, as we all know, the quality of that translation can be highly variable depending on your skill at prompt engineering, et cetera, et cetera. And so while typically SLOs are set to maintain a standard, and you want to remain above a threshold, and then you have burn alerts telling you how close you're getting to that threshold and how close you are to burning through that error budget. The team behind this LLM functionality, our query assistant team, were like, look, we know we're starting from a bad place quality-wise. We're like, I don't know, it was like we know we're starting from a questionable place quality-wise. I think they baselined it somewhere like 70% of people at the end of the experience clicked like, yes, on this was helpful. They were like, we want to set an SLO to tell us as we're improving. And so instead of setting a threshold that they wanted the number to stay above, they set a threshold that they expected it to stay below. But as they rolled out incremental improvements, they wanted to be told when it was starting to approach that line. You can imagine very different the like downstream actions for when the SLO burn alert fired, very different from an incident, but still a really clever way to use this functionality and this practice that is centered around what actually matters to gauge positive incremental improvement. So I like that story because SLOs are actually a lot more versatile than folks think, so long as you start from what is the experience we're trying to drive for customers. And how do we use data to gauge that?
That's super fit. My brain's like a little jammed up trying to think of ways to apply that, but I'll park that for now.
Yeah.
I think that's an awesome experience. And, it's kind of to your very early point of carrots and sticks, right? Like, it's sort of like, oh, we can't touch the electric floor or whatever versus, we're trying to achieve this height is a different, it's just a different mental framing. It's sort of maybe more engaging and something that's more active versus passive, like that thing sits in the background and we just hope it doesn't blow up and doesn't page us kind of thing. Awesome. Well, we've had a lot of discussion in here about confidence as well. And I want to transition to this new little segment that we're trying, the green build feeling. And the way that we describe it, because, we're in CI, is green builds have this like positive reinforcement, right? It's like, oh, I've made an incremental change and it's good. I know that it's good. And that allows me to go do the next thing. That gives me some confidence to keep going, et cetera. But there's also some metaphorical element of the small things that we achieve that really like help us feel like we're on the right track and moving towards the right outcome and whatever. So I was wondering if you could share a story or an experience you've had recently that gave you that, what we would call the green build feeling.
Yeah. Boy, this is making me feel very sheepish about how long it's been since I got to write some code. I will share on behalf of the team. So on Fridays, we do demo days. They're like a 1 hour thing, 45-minute thing. Everyone shows sort of some incremental thing that they've been working on that week. And my favorite demos are the ones that start with a honeycomb graph of like, this is what it looked like before. Some performance baseline or some usage metric or sometimes like errors over time, but often it's just something performance. And they talk through the change, they show the functionality, or they show something, and they end with, this is the honeycomb graph after. And talking about building confidence, talking about, gaining, feeling like you're aware of impact. From my seat, I get a green build feeling from knowing that our engineers are getting that green build feeling from their work. Like, I get excited about that. That's how we ship code. That's how we measure impact. So that's what comes to mind since I no longer spend my days in an IDE.
Well, I mean, it is a metaphor, but I feel you. Like, I actually miss. It's actually interesting. This is not the point of this segment, but just since I feel like we're in similar boats. As an engineer, as an IC, like you could have even some testing frameworks, run as soon as you save a file, right? There's an event within the operating system. There's a file saved, run the thing, and you get the green. It's just like green, green, green. And the feedback loop is so tight and so rewarding. And as you grow in your career, as you get into management and leadership, et cetera, the feedback on your decisions is like years sometimes. And I really wish it was seconds. Like, that was really, it is fun. It's fun. And so and part of that becomes, as you're describing, the joy of seeing that happen at a tighter feedback pace with other people, right? Other people that are in your team or whatever. I love that example. And I love the data-driven approach.
I mean, the reason I'm so excited to be on this podcast. The reason I'm generally love being a CircleCI customer. There are so many parallels between testing and observability, right? What is observability if not checking what you expect to happen against what's actually happening just in production. And this is, again, going back to like the little drum that I beat about why observability is better for developers than ops people. It's like developers are really accustomed to building that feedback loop. They're really accustomed, that's what was TDD. It's that feeling of like, I expect it should behave this way, and let me write code to satisfy these tests. And I think that this is changing. I feel like, 5 years ago, there's a lot more of developers being like, I don't know if I want to look at production all that much. Ops people are scary, but production is just an extension of a development environment. Mm-hmm. And with tests that maybe you didn't write. And I'm excited to keep helping developers get that level of confidence and, focus on what they want to focus on, which is shipping and not being afraid of the ops team. I may be projecting a little bit too much of my personal experiences in this podcast, but
I think there's an entire movement named after this problem. I think that what's fascinating about that is it's taken us a lot. Like it felt like, oh yeah, what we'll do is we'll have this DevOps, whatever. People will work together, cats and dogs playing nicely, whatever that might be. Like there was clearly a reason for that. First of all, so I'm just trying to say it's not just your personal experience, but also how far into that we are and still grappling with many of these challenges, right? Like it's real. Humans are real. Human dynamics are real. And the desire to do the thing that you were focused on doing versus trying to understand a bunch of different systems, that's real. And so how can we make that, going back to your point of putting it in terms and language that makes sense to the developer, also isolating them from the part of the system that is not really theirs in a way that's useful and constructive, not like, oh, now I need to understand every piece of this in order to worry about my part, right? Like we're still figuring some of those bits out. I think it's a long journey that we're on, but I think it's ultimately better and ultimately aimed at helping people deliver the real value.
Well, and I think that, DevOps, we are still in it, right? When you think about what people really associate with DevOps, it's like that was the first wave. It was getting ops people to automate their work, to bring more dev into infrastructure changes and monitoring. That was the first wave, but that's just moving ops towards dev. Now this observability, embracing chaos, it's moving dev towards ops. It's enabling developers to own their code in production, and feel like they're there for the entire life cycle of their code. And so it has to be both. We're not done with the DevOps movement. I know they're death of DevOps people, whatever. It's all a journey. Both sides need to move towards the center, and this CI/CD observability, they're all things that are facilitating that change. Yeah.
Amazing. All right, I'm going to leave it there. A ton of interesting insight. Hope everyone who's listening has enjoyed this. If you want us to talk about something in particular or interview someone in particular on any of these topics, find us on Twitter at CircleCI or ping me on LinkedIn. I'm easy enough to find. Subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. And Christine, thank you again. Thank you so much for joining. This has been amazing.
This has been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Also, if you're interested in more of this content, you should check out our new Confident Commit newsletter. You can find it under CircleCI on LinkedIn and subscribe today.